multi-exit entrepreneur, business strategist, best-selling author. I don't know if you want to refer to yourself as a Web3 visionary, but you're definitely championing the future of arts and culture. Chris Snook, I want to thank you so much for joining me today.
Super excited to be here. I love Philippines, love Philippine Blockchain Week, and excited to be here with the star today. So it's great.
Awesome. So, Chris, your career as an entrepreneur has its roots largely in tech and media ventures. And I know that today much of your focus is on the future of Web3. So I just wanted to ask, first and foremost, what brought you to this space?
Yeah, and I'll clarify because I think it might be relevant to people that are looking at this market and all the disruption. They're hearing about AI, they're hearing about all this, that they might be afraid if they're going to lose their job. I had no idea that I would become an entrepreneur. It was not something that I was born around. It's not something that my parents did. My father was an educator and then became an administrator in the athletics area of a high school. Mom, was kind of like what would have been a gig economist today or a gig worker, but back then there was no internet, no mobile phones, smartphones, right? So she primarily stayed home and raised us, and she had a bunch of different things. She definitely was opportunistic, but she was home. And so I came up from a family. Fortunately, I was rich in love, and we were middle class when there was one in America. But we certainly were not wealthy. We didn't have, I didn't really understand that. Like I didn't know anything about money. So I say all that because technology was even further from my mind, right? Like at least I understood that there was people that had money, more of it than we did. They had more clothes than we did. I had 5 outfits: Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, right? Growing up. And so when I got to college, I was an athlete. And I always tell people today, especially Gen Y and Gen Z, most people that are like 16 to 25, especially when I'm in Asia or Philippines or anywhere, but like they are so far ahead in their thinking about their life, their career. They may be lacking in other things, but at 25, I literally was the first time that I had read a book for pleasure that I wasn't prescribed to by my education. And that wasn't because I was like dumb or not interested. It didn't occur to me to do those things. I love sports. I came up playing sports, and so I had the opportunity to play sports in college, and that's why I went to college. Otherwise, I would have not gone to college. And this is, in 1994. So it was pretty much like you either go to college or you're like a degenerate. There was no, in America anyway, there was no like, oh, good idea, take a gap year. Like you were definitely a degenerate drug user or something bad if that was your choice. But I at 18, I honestly didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up. I loved playing the drums. I still drum to this day. And I loved playing football and baseball. And so that's all I really cared about doing. I couldn't see myself like being in a cubicle. I couldn't see myself. And I had no idea what an entrepreneur was because it wasn't a word then, like not like it is today. So I went to college because I got a chance to play football, and they made you pick something to major in. I tried to major in music, and my guidance counselor, this is why you got to be careful when you listen to authority. And for those who know me well, will never believe this is something I actually did, but it actually is a real thing. And I still to this day have no idea why I didn't question it. But I remember sitting with my high school guidance counselor, like right before you graduate, and they said, what are you going to major in at your school that you're going to? And I said, I'm thinking about majoring in music. Because again, the only other thing I love to do and I could see myself doing for the rest of my life is playing the drums. And I didn't have delusions of being like a rock star. That would have been cool. But I just wanted to be like a professional musician where I could just make a living. And to me, like 75,000 US at that time was like, wow, I'm killing it. Like that was like all the money in the world. Like that was the height of my ambition. Like I was like, oh, that'd be amazing. So I was just looking to do something I loved and make a living doing it and enjoy life. And I say all that because it's amazing how much you can accomplish in a short period of time with the compound effect of your knowledge. And we'll get into kind of the technology piece here, but I just say that as a backstory because I believe that every human being is entering a period of their life right now, regardless of whether they're a boomer and they're still active in the economy, whether they're a Gen X, like my age bracket, a Gen Y, or Gen Z. They are entering a time where they can literally, and they'll probably be forced to, reinvent themselves. And I think that's an important thing to embrace, right? Because if you don't embrace it, then it's scary, right? So when I went to college, they said, my guidance counselor told me, you can't major in music. Now, he had no authority. Like, he couldn't prevent me from doing it. Right? I wish I remembered his name, but because I'd give him a shout out. But he said, you can't major in music. And I remember asking him very specifically, I was like, why? Like, that doesn't make any sense. And who are you to tell me? And he said, well, because you're playing football, right? And I said, yeah. And he goes, well, if you break your finger, which is probably going to happen, and you can't hold a drumstick, you won't be able to pass your exams. Like, think about how stupid that is. Like, coming out of my mouth, I cannot believe an adult that advises children. But guess what I said? I was like, huh, like, I actually considered it because of the authority. Because this person had authority, I was like, huh, I mean, I hadn't thought of that, right? I mean, I was like, I didn't think of that. And he goes, plus, how are you going to be in the locker room at halftime when the marching band is on the field?
No way.
Yeah, you cannot make this stuff up.
Okay.
So I didn't, and I went to a school that at the time was a Division II school, like it was a smaller state college, but they had one of the most nationwide renowned music programs in the country. So, like, I could have played Division II college football and enjoyed that, and I could have gotten a degree and learned new skills to add to my percussion at a school that had a very well-established and well-funded music program. And I didn't even consider it after that. I never even asked the university. I never even thought about it. So I remember having a conversation with my dad. I didn't tell him that part, but I was like, I don't know what I'm going to major in. And, you know, back then, everybody that played football, like on the TV, like, you'd see them and they're like, I major in business. I major in business. And I'm like, yeah, but I'm not interested in business. Like, I don't know anything about business. Business sounds boring, right? I'm like, I guess, because I'm so pragmatic, I was like, I guess I'll major in like exercise science and like kinesiology, which is the study of the muscles in the body.
Mm-hmm.
And my dad said, oh, you could be a gym teacher like I was. And I was like, no, Dad, no offense. Like, I don't want to be a gym teacher, you know, like, sorry, like, no, you know? And I was like, but at least if I'm going to be playing football, the only other thing that I love, I might as well learn how to make my muscles stronger, because that'll at least show up somewhere in my real life. Like, in other words, that's practical. I say that because being practical and being a pragmatist has always been how I've defined my view of the future. So, like, I have a video out there somewhere from when Digital Sense came out, and I said, I'm not a futurist, I'm a pragmatist, hell bent on helping you capitalize on the future that's unfolding rapidly. And I say that because I think sometimes we get too far out of our own, you know, domain, and like, we worry about and we think about all these things, and it's not that they don't matter, that they're not to be considered, but until you can connect the dots to what a human being is going to be able to do, or what they're going to revert to when it comes to habit, it's probably not relevant. So, okay, so how did I get into technology? So I spent the first, 10 years of my entrepreneurial career, 9 years basically of my entrepreneurial career, coming up through a variety of different things, starting in the fitness business in 1999, because again, that's what I understood. I didn't know I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I just came out of grad school, and after basically getting 2 college degrees, an undergraduate and a master's, I was told in San Diego, California, that I was worth $37,000 a year. Now, if you've never been to San Diego, California, in 1999, $37,000 a year was about $2 above poverty. Like, it's not, you can't live on it, right? Like, not well. You got roommates, you've got, a crappy car, your overdraft protection hits every Friday night. And that's what 37,000 a year. And so you can imagine my dismay, having come up where it was like, go to school, get a college degree, earn a living. Well, when I got out of undergrad with that exercise science degree, they told me I was worth $22,000 a year to be a personal trainer. And I was making this, and I would have been making the same amount of money as a guy who was a certified personal trainer that took a weekend course. So I have a 4-year college degree. This guy has a 2 thing. And so this is when my business brain started to activate, right? Because now I was entering the real world and money became something I had to figure out. Does that make sense?
Makes a lot of sense. I mean,
So
you just really quickly. I mean, you touched on this, I guess, this healthy distrust of authority, or at least the wisdom of the existing institutions.
yeah, there's
Whether
a
it be,
balance.
yeah,
There's a balance, right? I mean, and we don't have time to get into it, but you know, when I did my keynote in Manila last year, I talked about the 8 forces driving Web3 innovation. And before I do any keynotes, I typically talk about my biases and what shaped them, because I think it's important for people to understand, like, who are they listening to before they start listening to me, because of my experience, right? Because everyone's right from their own perspective. Like that's a nugget that I wrote down years ago. And and if you think about it for a minute, you noodle on it, it's like, wow, that's true. Like whenever I'm arguing with someone, why am I arguing with them? Well, because from my perspective, I'm right. And what are they doing? From their perspective, they're right. So everyone is always right from their perspective, right? Democrats, Republicans, whatever the parties are there, they all are right from their perspective. The key to success and the key to moving massive amounts of humanity is figuring out how to understand that perspective and empathize with it enough without sacrificing your own beliefs, so that you might be able to learn something, and more importantly, so that you can find a bridge in the middle or a common ground to move ahead. And managing people, all these things based on our abilities to do that, typically. So my biases have been shaped by several books. Now, I won't get into all of them, but one of them that is related to this is The Fourth Turning by Neil Howe and William Strauss. It came out in 1997, but they just republished it again, I think, this year. Strauss has now passed on about a decade ago, I think. Howe's in his late 50s, and it's still one of my top 5 books of all time, because it talks about these cyclical turnings in history. We would think of them as winter, spring, summer, and fall if we were using a metaphor of like the 4 seasons. But the West, and America specifically, which is only 240 some years old, we have always had this kind of doctrine or this belief that it's up and to the right? Infinite growth, right? Invest in the stock market 40 years ago and you're up X% a year on average over this index for inflation. But it's not really true when you actually look at the time periods that a normal human being would actually be invested in the stock market. In that case, your returns on that average are like negative 2%. So the point is that when you look at these turnings, depending on when we're born, we take on a certain archetype, according to this thesis, which is fascinating, based on our generation. And it has nothing to do with our personality, but it shapes our personality, because when we're born during one of these seasons. And so if you think about winter, spring, summer, and fall, winter is known as what they call the crisis, or the fourth turning. And so every 20 to 25 years, you move through these things. Well, this book fundamentally changed the way I thought about things. And to this day, I've not been able to prove it wrong. And the reason why I say that is because it helps us understand where we are in time. Right now, according to their math, and this has happened for, they went back 1,500 years, or back to like the 1500s or something like that. I can't remember. And they kind of mapped it, and they looked at all these different archetypes and these famous people that fit each archetype during those different turnings. And the last time we came out of a crisis or a fourth turning was April of 1945. Now, what happened? You're in the Philippines. What happened in April of 1945?
The Japanese occupation ended. Yeah, this
Right.
is during World War II, right?
End of World War II. And what happened after that was we went into the first turning of the next cycle, the next 100 years, which is where we are right now. We're in that 4 turnings, but we are at the end of it. So now we're in the 4th turning of that 100-year cycle.
Fascinating.
So it's freaking fascinating. When you think about that from a business, from a personal standpoint, here's a couple things that happened. So I was born in 1975, right? I am a Gen X. Now, when I was born during the period where my parents, who were boomers, they were born during the high, right? Because every American came home from war, all the GIs came home, and there was a baby boom, right? And we had more human beings born in that next 10-year period than any other time in history. The other thing that happened was Europe was blown to shreds, right? Asia was blown to shreds. We were now occupying everything. We did we did all these different agreements, right, to the treaty. And essentially, all the gold came here to pay us to rebuild. So America went into this boom period as we rebuilt the rest of the world during peacetime. And my parents were born as children during that time. So what did they have? They had a completely different upbringing than their parents, who were born and came of age during the Depression, right? Where there was soup lines and 25% employment. So think about how that would shape you when you grow up with a white picket fence and a house and the American dream, and that's all you know.
Yeah.
Right? That becomes your normal, but you're too young to know. So as you start to come of age and you get into your earning years, 18, 19, 20, 25, your dream is to what? Advance and do better for your kids. That's every parent's dream, regardless of our culture. Right?
Absolutely.
So what our boomers did was they were trying to maintain and advance the lifestyle for their own needs and also for their children that their parents gave them. However, the economy is different in that awakening period. So you go through the high and then you come to the awakening. And the awakening is basically where the stuff that was established, the new institutions, all the new laws, all the new, government institutions, and the status quo gets built in the first 25 years of the next turning, because everything from the old world got blown up or disrupted or decayed at the end of the last fourth turning. So we established things like CDC and WHO and like all these things that we now have today. And when they're established, you trust them. Why? Because you're part of building them, right? They are better than whatever you replace them with. So there's a whole generation that trusts them implicitly. My grandparents, the children born in that era, grow up believing in them because they benefit from them because they're in the early days of them before they get. By the midpoint, when I'm coming of age, those things are starting to, fall apart. They're getting corrupted. They're getting right, but we're still only 50 years in.
Yes.
So as I'm coming of age, and what's happening is the economy and inflation and all these other things are taking place. So two parents are now working versus one. So we're left alone. So in every time they've looked at this, John Adams, for instance, one of our founding fathers, was a nomad generation. A Gen X is a nomad generation, according to this book. What that means is we raise ourselves. Like, we're not parented at all in the sense of a generational archetype. We are left alone. I was told, go out, come home when the street light comes on. No parent today does that for their child. There's
absolutely not. Right.
We didn't have helmets when we rode bikes. We didn't do, right? Like, so when you think about it, what do the next generation do? Well, they overprotect their kids, right? So this whole thing matters because ultimately where we're at, fast forward, that's part of my bias, but you got to understand my bias before you can understand whether I'm crazy or whether I'm making sense. That's one of my biases. The other bias was shaped by a book called Watchman's Rattle by Rebecca Costa. Watchman's Rattle talks about how human beings can manufacture and invent complexity far faster than our ability to deal with it cognitively. A simple example. I don't know what phone you have. Doesn't matter. Android, iPhone, doesn't matter. It's one of those. What do you do when the screen freezes?
Restart it.
You hold the button down.
Yeah.
And you pray.
Because more accurately, that's right. Yes.
After you tap it a bunch of times. And guess what I do? The exact same thing. And guess what the person who works at Samsung does? Exactly the same thing. Why? Because none of us know how it works.
Right.
This phone today, this $1,400 iPhone 14 Plus, or whatever the heck it is, has more computing power and more access to information than Ronald Reagan had when he was in office, by a factor of 2. And we've now democratized these to billions of people, whether they can afford running water or not. So when you invent complexity, what do you also create? You create problems you don't have the solution to.
Right.
What does that do? That creates gridlock in the political and in the public discourse. It creates populism on the polls, right? On each poll, because people can't figure anything out. They don't know how it works. And most of the day, they don't have to know because it just gets them through their day. Well, now we've added, narrow AI and all these things we've seen for the last year. I'm not talking about like what's coming. I'm talking about what we've had already today. So when you put all these things together and you connect the dots, you can start to really understand the level of exponential change that we're already experiencing for the last 10 years. Like, anybody under the age of what is it? So 15 years ago? 15 years ago, we had the GFC, the Great Financial Crisis, right? 2008. So anybody under the age of 25 doesn't remember it. You know, I saw a video, sadly, on you know, the other day, somebody was like doing these street interviews, asking American college kids, where's Pearl Harbor? And they asked 10 kids and none of them knew. One said Florida. They said, when did that happen? Only one kid got it right. Everyone else was like in the 60s and the 80s. I mean, literally, like 23-year-old kids today, 22-year-old don't even know when Pearl Harbor was. Pretty significant event. And that's not the point. The point is that, like, what they do know is they know whatever's in their feed, and right. And so algorithmically now, just in the last 10 years, we have programmed the brain in ways we don't understand yet. We've changed the way kids' brains are formed if they've had a phone. They've done studies on this. The suicide rate among 11-year-old girls is like 16% or something silly in America. I don't know what it is globally. And so as you're coming into this, you go, holy crap, like, well, what's the positive, Chris? Well, the positive is, right, human beings are some of the most creative, inventive, and resilient people on the planet Earth. Filipino people would be at the top of my list in that regard. Because of just the historical thing that your country and your people have gone through, and the level of kindness they exhibit today to strangers should be a course and case study on how to treat people in the world. I say all that because where I came from and where I am are two different things, but it wasn't overnight, and it certainly wasn't by design in the beginning. All I wanted to do was figure out how to, I couldn't get a job. I was like, I need to pay my rent. I'm no different than anybody else. I need to pay my rent. And if I'm going to pay my rent, like, I may as well rent something nicer than what I have right now. Right. And then I got around people. And then I started to see things I hadn't seen when I was growing up. And I drove a BMW for the first time. And I went, wow, that sure beats the hell out of a Ford. And then, and then you kind of chase the material stuff for a little while, right? Because it's new. And because, if you're like me, you grew up in Trenton, like New Jersey, you don't know that many people unless they're doctors or lawyers or things that you aren't, that have BMWs and have mansions. And so you go through this phase in your early 20s or whenever you get started, right, where you pursue the material stuff. And, there's healthy aspects to that because they stretch you. And then there's unhealthy ones. Like, I believe, you have to lose yourself sometimes to find yourself. And hopefully you do on the other side of that. Some people lose themselves and never find themselves, and that's sad. But this whole process of being an entrepreneur is about meaning and purpose. It's not about accumulation, because it's a brutal life in the sense of, like, it's not glamorous. We've glamorized it in the last decade because of social media, but it's all fake. I mean, just ask someone who's an influencer how happy they are. Most of them are not that happy. Right? They just don't know what to do different because they're now making money doing something, but they feel like a slave to their own grind because they're tethered to their fans, their followers, their audience, their strangers, whoever they are. And they didn't know what they were getting up and into when they signed up. I'm not saying everybody's miserable. I'm saying there's no such thing as like, oh, that's easy. Like, if you can't find it without all those things, you're not going to find it with those things. So technology is a tool. And it can also be a weapon. And, I'm focused on this point in my career and life and trying to, I'm inspired by the fear that I have that this fourth turning could be the last one of its kind. I don't know that. I'm not saying that to fearmonger. I'm saying that we are getting to a point where the capabilities that we're all aware of or that we read about in the news, like AI, like these things, whether we're 20 years away from artificial general intelligence or 10 years or 5, doesn't matter. We're going to get there in this lifetime. Right? And once we get there, that'll be the last thing a human ever invents.
Right.
And when you think about so think about it for a minute. Let's say it took us 100 years to get there. You and I might be dead. Okay. But our kids, or our grandkids are still alive. That'll be the last thing they invent. So then you go, okay, so I find myself walking on the beach now in the mornings and I see dogs and they look happy, right? They're out for their walk and they're playing on the sand and they're smiling. And I'm going, maybe there's something to that. Like maybe being the house pet, if you're treated well, right,
Yeah.
isn't so bad.
You know, it's terrifying, but true. I mean, yeah. Hey,
I mean, you
I
don't
mean,
want to be the junkyard dog, right? You don't want to be the
yeah,
dog at the you know, like
right.
Ben Gertzel, who's a friend and who is we have a couple portfolio companies like Twin Protocol and things with
Mm,
him from Singularity Net. He invented Sophia the robot with David Hansen.
right, right.
And you know, Ben's whole mission is AGI, is the godfather of AGI. And we talk about these things. And I asked him, I said, at what point, Ben, are we all house pets? And he said, well, I would rather be a squirrel in the park. And he was serious. And I said, what do you mean by that? And he said, well, you know, yeah, house pet's good as long as you're in the right house. You know, there's nothing wrong with that, but you're still confined, right? Like you might not be let out if he said a squirrel in the park is free. And you know, they don't know any different, but they're free, and that park is their domain, and they run around and they kind of do their nuts, and they like he's like, I'd rather have that because that's kind of like the best that it's going to get. And he said, and then what you hope for is that when, you know, whether you're a squirrel or an ant, that like when our overlords come by us, that just like a good human might, like they consider us before they, you know, stomp us. He's like, so, you know, I want to be a squirrel where it's like they look at me and go, oh, look, or if I'm in the way, they go, oh, let me put you over here before they just, you know, do that. And he was
Yeah,
saying it not dramatically. He was saying it because, you know, we can resist it all we want. The good news is that we have choice still. But what we don't have choice on is if we want to be part of the solution, like if we're listening to this still,
right.
this conversation, then we're awake enough to have some draw to it. And I learned a long time ago, you know, I think it's the Latin root, but dea and sire means to give birth to. So desire in the English language is not seeking something without myself, like outside of myself. It's literally something within me that's burning, trying to unveil itself, trying to be revealed. So desire is nothing but trying to release some unlock and inner potential that I have. So if I'm desirous of impacting this exponential future that we might be a little afraid of, then it's probably hard to turn away from it and not live with some regret. Because if I live long enough to see it happen, or if I go to my deathbed while it's happening, I might know, like, hey, I could have done something about that. Or maybe I could have contributed to that conversation, and maybe I could have shaped the way ethics and design or people thought about these things before we programmed them and before they started to program themselves. Maybe I could have helped input into the language model something that was a little bit more culturally diverse or empathetic, or, you know, like there's all these inputs that are going to happen. And the worst case scenario would be that the machines learn from us because we've been brutal to each other.
Right. And we're
So
seeing that with a lot of the biases that appear in generative AI. Like, I mean, there's this big news where racism, for example, was encoded into a lot of early experiments accidentally encoded into a lot of early experiments that Google is making in AI.
Yeah, and I mean, you know, we can talk about things like, so here's a couple of things that I've only been to Philippines one time, and I was there last year, and I had a phenomenal week there, and the event was amazing. It was one of the best events of the 29 global events that I'd spoken at in the last 3 years in different parts of the world. It was literally top two. And no, you know, and I say that because I can't wait to see what happens this year. And one of the things that stood out at me, and I made comments to Cheska and some of the other conveners like Donald and Janelle, was there was a representation of female entrepreneurs, leaders, that was noticeable for me from the audience. No one was promoting it that way, but I just noticed, wow, there's like 4 women and 1 dude on that panel. Wow, there's another female. And about halfway through day 2, I thought, this is just organic. Like that, you know, I'm not saying there wasn't an intention to do it. I'm saying that this market just happens to have a participation rate that is more diverse when it comes to, you know, representation of different genders or what have you. And as someone who's organized events and has always tried to find a way to like kind of make sure if I'm given the choice, without it being like affirmative action or some like, thing that I'm promoting, like, hey, I just want to try and get as many cognitive minds of diverse thinking. And, cognitive diversity is more important than the color of our skin diversity, right? But usually they go hand in hand, because where we grow up and culture is nothing more in my, world than group habit, right? It's always the other guy with the accent or the other gal with the accent. So, when we think about culture in that way, it was interesting to me to see that, because I thought that was a good thing. When I think about the youth and the demographic data that comes out of Southeast Asia, Philippines, Indonesia, these emerging markets and Web3, it's encouraging because it's piled with youth, right? It's whatever it is, like 60%, like 28 or less. And they're all connected, which has good and bad things, but they're native digital. And so, there's so much possibility in this too. And at the same time, we're going to see a massive amount of disruption to core industries, including in the Philippines. But I think there's an opportunity more than a immediate disruption, right? Nothing happens overnight. But when we think about like, well, what jobs would AI replace? Well, it's going to replace call centers. It's going to replace, paralegals. It's going to replace, potentially it'll replace business process organization jobs. But it won't replace them all. And it's not going to replace them all overnight. What will likely happen is someone will figure out a model for a BPO, as an example, that can work with 50% of the same headcount and put out similar or better productivity for their clients and charge the same rate with 50% more margin. And as soon as somebody does that, if they're an outsider, then that market moves, right? Just like you guys kind of took a bunch of the BPO business away from India. So opportunity, like it's always fluid. The opportunity is to go, well, wait a minute, like we have all these other demographics. We have this Web3 native culture. We have 32 million of our 100 and some odd million folks that have an NFT because of Axie or because of some earlier experiment. That's a pretty sizable adoption rate. How do we do things like Philippine Blockchain Week? How do we bring in some of the leading minds from around the world? How do we bring in the thought leaders and the conversations that matter and the corporate brands that are trying to figure this out? How do we work across this value chain of entrepreneur, early entrant into the workforce or talent, big corporate and capital and outsourcing? And how do we kind of lead the conversation for what this future could be, should be, maybe doesn't want to be? And that's what's exciting for me about PBW and being part of it and having come last year.
So Chris, speaking of having these conversations, because these conversations are very important, bringing all of these different diverse perspectives to the table. Not all of these perspectives are tech savvy or Web3 savvy, but many of them are not any less important for not being savvy. And so a lot of the communication work you're doing around championing these technologies, I've followed, and one that I thought that really stood out to me back in March. I don't know if you remember this, but you did an interview with Authority Magazine, perhaps a written interview where you used what I think is one of the best analogies for how NFTs can be used as enablers for a new kind of digital economy. So you likened what NFTs can do to what standardized shipping containers did for unlocking billions in global economic activity. Just wanted to ask you quickly, could you share that with our audience really quick?
Yeah, no, I'm glad. Thank you for reading that, number one. Yeah, I do remember that one. So, and you guys, again, you guys will relate to this from, forget the technology, right? Just think about practical, what happened in the economy. When we stopped putting stuff on wooden boats, right? Where they were in nets and they were in barrels and they were like in different shaped things, and they stacked on a boat, and then you had to put all the crew on there and all the food and provisions, and then you had to sail it across the ocean to go trade. When we stopped doing that, and somebody invented a standardized protocol called a steel box, 9 feet wide by 45 feet long or 20 feet long. Those are the two standards, 9 by 20, 9 by 45. All of a sudden, instead of wood ships, we built these massive steel iron barges, right? And we stacked these things wide and high as you can imagine. And it didn't matter if on this one there was coffee beans, and in this one, it was BMWs. What did that do for global commerce? What did that do for the ability for e-commerce and drop shipping businesses to take off? It made it possible, right, for more product to move more places in shorter amount of time for less cost in a more secure way. It made it easier to insure, right? It, like, think about all the impacts of a steel box. Now, what is a steel box? It's a container. That's all it is. But because it's standardized, or because there's a way to program cranes and things at ports, we can now automate or increase the automation of loading and unloading. Because it's 9x45 or 9x20, it could be fit very easily without changing it from the ship it came off to the flatbed that's going to take it the last mile to the customer. What we're seeing with tokens and tokenization is the digital equivalent of that, but it'll unlock. So that I forget the exact number. There's a book called Trillions, and it's not about money. It's about trillions of IoT smart machine learning sensors in our environment by the year 2027, I think is their prediction, which means that, if we have 7 trillion cells in our body, imagine a trillion smart connective sensors in our environment around us. It's almost the equivalent of shaping our reality in real time, because those sensors are learning from us, they're learning from each other, and they're getting smarter with every clip, and they're literally shape-shifting our experience as we're just going about our life in real life, right? With facial recognition, with all this stuff. So this book talked about shipping containers, and I believe when shipping containers got invented, the exponential lift was somewhere over the next couple of years, it was like $20 billion worth of new product on the oceans at any given minute of any 24-hour day.
Wow.
More than before, right? So it just unleashed this massive opportunity. So as much as we have to, be, I don't want to say fearful, we have to be thoughtful, and we have to pay attention. And I believe at whatever level we choose or we want to, we have to learn and educate ourselves, not from the hype, but from the human side of, if I'm going to think about it like raising a child, right? It's going to become exponentially smarter, stronger, faster, better than you. What would you teach it? Would you teach it all your bad habits? Probably not, right? So everybody can kind of play at whatever level they want that way, or at least get informed that way, because you're going to vote. So if nothing else, like, no politician, if they don't have an answer for this stuff, you're not on my list. Like, you better at least understand or know who to ask, right? Because that's the world that they're governing in. They're not governing in a world from 1945. So, we don't have to go down that rabbit hole, but and this is global, not just American. This is everywhere, right? Leaders and who we vote for, the populace has to inform itself. It also has to realize that algorithmically we are being programmed to fear, to be manipulated to vote one way or the other if we don't just pause and think. It's not about questioning authority. It's about realizing where we are in the turning. Where we are in the turning is not because we don't trust each other, because we don't trust each other. It's what happens in the fourth turning. Every single time we lose complete faith in all the institutions that are the status quo, because we are at the end of a 100-year cycle where those institutions are no longer serving at the level that they should, the population that they're supposed to. And the new ones haven't been built big enough yet to take over. And so we live in this gap, right? And when we live in this gap, you have people holding on and you have people forward, and everyone else is stuck in the middle being manipulated with fear. And so when you think about it through that framework, you don't feel special. You don't feel smart. You just go, now I get it. So before I react, if I see something that's going to make me upset, I'm human. Sometimes I get upset. But before I actually give that too much attention, I have to go, why am I upset right now? What are they trying to make me upset for? And then when I really agree with something, okay, why am I prone to agree with that? Right? Just start to think a little.
Yeah.
And I forget where I was going with that, but the shipping container thing to NFTs. So a container is an easy way to think about a non-fungible token. or a fungible token. So what's fungible? Fungible means like a dollar bill. I have a dollar bill, you have a dollar bill, right? They're fungible, meaning they might have different serial numbers on them, but they're interchangeable.
Right.
Right? Like if I give you mine and you give me yours, we didn't do anything different.
Yeah.
There's nothing unique.
Mm-hmm.
It's a fair trade. It was equal, right? A non-fungible, the easiest example I have for everybody is a human being. Right? There's no two human beings, even twins. There's no two human beings that are exactly alike. So every human being, every baby that's born is a one of one. So a non-fungible token is a container that holds something, or the representation something. Primarily what it holds is it holds the pointer to a ledger, i.e. a blockchain, where that actual value or asset is. Very rarely does it actually hold the thing. It actually almost never holds the thing.
Right.
Right. So when you say, oh, it's a JPEG or it's a Bored Ape, right? That's all it is. Well, it's not even that. It's just the location where that specific one of one Bored Ape is findable on a blockchain. It's kind of like the Dewey Decimal System in the library.
Right.
It's not the book itself. It's where you can find the book.
Right.
The book itself is stored somewhere on a physical shelf, right? Or on a server if it's an ebook, much like the Bored Ape is stored on IPFS or the cloud, or it's stored on Arweave, or it's stored on some storage thing. The ownership says, I own the one of one. I own the location of that copy, and I own whatever rights come with that. So think about that. If I can program a container with any number of things, I can program it to shut off in certain special economic zones. I can program it to be not viewable in certain censored zones. I can program it to spend or not spend, or burn or not burn based on a certain geo target, i.e. a concert or a game. So I now sell you a ticket, but instead of getting a QR code, you get an NFT, and you have it on your wallet, on your mobile phone. And the minute you walk across a certain geofence, right, it burns that ticket. I know that you've entered the stadium. If when you walk into certain parts of the stadium, it unlocks a coupon for 20% off beer or Coke, right? Whatever, I can make it do whatever I want.
Right.
So what we've done is, so I can tokenize real world assets that are hard to move, like pallets of gold. So how do I move a pallet of gold? I don't. That's too risky, right? If I move it, what if I lose one? What if one breaks? What if somebody steals it? What if, right? So
what if the barge sinks, right? Then it's gone.
What if the barge sinks?
Right.
So I'm not going to move it, right? It's going to stay where it is. But how do I transfer it easily? How do I transfer it across borders frictionlessly? How do I do that? Well, I wrap it in a token, right? And that token is what trades hands.
So, Chris, what I love about this shipping container analogy is it frames NFTs as simply a new way to do something we've always done, which is transport value. And I think that speaks to how you've been approaching technology. This entire conversation is it's just a manifestation of human behavior. We've always done this, right? But
we've always done it, and yeah, we've always done it. And the caveat is, though, we think linearly, and we always will, because we've evolved over millions of years or thousands of years, right? Our brain evolves over thousands of years. We invent complexity, back to Rebecca's book from 2011, in picoseconds, right? Nanoseconds, picoseconds, whatever, however the fastest you can think, almost at the speed of light. So why I say that is because, yes, there's a lot to be learned from history, because this is not new. It's a new expression, and it's a new utility that was not previously available to us. Much like prior to steel, we couldn't have made a steel container. Once steel was invented, 100 years later, or whatever it was, 50 years later, somebody made a steel container. Then that container was a more cost-effective, more efficient, more secure way of moving goods at scale across an ocean, right? So it had exponential increase to the global impact of a financial economy that we all live and work in. NFTs will do that the same way, but exponentially higher than that, orders of magnitude higher than that. Why? Because physical containers can only hold what? Physical goods. A token, a non-fungible token, for instance, or a digital token, can hold representations of physical and digital goods. It's the arbitrage of bits and atoms, and it's frictionless. It can move across in seconds, not months, not weeks. It can change hands in micropayments without the fees associated with credit cards or Swift banks or things like that, right? So these things create orders of magnitude cost reduction. And it's also something to be held in a wallet that isn't physical. So anybody that has any access to a mobile device, which is pretty much the whole world coming up over the next 2 years, there's not going to be a human on this planet that wants one that won't have one, $1,000 supercomputer in their hand. And so all of a sudden we bring 3 billion new people over the next 3 years into the commercial economy that have never been bankable, never been identifiable, because you can't get a bank account in the current system without an identity. 2.5 billion people don't have an identity. What is a human? A human's non-fungible. What if we could wrap every human in a non-fungible token that they owned, and then with zero knowledge proofs, they could use to connect that data feed to the relevant sources, governmental or not, to be verifiable. And meanwhile, they could get a wallet. And if they didn't ever have to transact in fiat, they don't need the KYC or AML. They can just basically transact in whatever tokens they're willing to trade amongst their community. And so all of a sudden now you have all these economies that emerge that level the playing field.
Right. So Chris, I just wanted to jump in really quick here because I think you're touching on something incredible. All of this speaks to a larger conversation that we need to have around this big paradigm shift towards Web3. And a lot of facets there you touched on: decentralization, digital identities, I think is fascinating, human as non-fungible. But what I really want to talk to you about right now is data ownership, right? Because it's something that you feel you're talking about it right now, very passionately about it. Right now, people are pretty cavalier with their data. And companies are getting really aggressive as well with the data that they gather. I recently, I really recently bought a smart lamp, right? And the smart lamp apparently needed access to my contacts and messages just to turn on. Not the best purchase I ever made. I think the lamp lives in a drawer now. But you've often described data as the new uranium, right? As opposed to the new oil, highlighting not just its value, but then its potential to be weaponized, as you touched on earlier. So I think that's a fascinating and poignant take. I'm hoping you can explain that a bit for me.
You did do your research on me. I appreciate that. Uranium, because for those who, I'm not a nuclear physicist, right? I played one on TV once. But uranium is used to essentially create nuclear power or nuclear bombs, right? So it can be a tool, or it can be a weapon of essentially existential destruction. And so years ago, I forget who it was, and I don't want to misspeak it, but a thought leader like in 2015 or 2017 said data is the new oil. And the analogy was the most valuable commodity on the earth has always been oil, right? And in 2015, 16, whenever they said it, they were saying now data has outpaced oil as the most valuable commodity on earth, right? I say data is the new uranium because it's oil and then some, right? And the reason why is because it has been weaponized. This isn't something that could happen. This is something that's been happening for a decade plus. We're just now starting to be awake to it. Now, I will say, because I endeavored to do this, had a couple companies in the portfolio. I ran one for a while that was really focused on literally giving everybody a decentralized ID and a mobile operating system on their phone that was forked off of Android, that was de-Googled, that was literally gave you choice, right? And the whole positioning of that brand and business was, we sell technologies that power choice. Because my choices around my data or privacy will be totally different than yours. And they should be respected. And I'm not here to tell you how to live your life. But your technology doesn't give you a choice. We don't have choice right now. We have the illusion of it. When we walk into a phone store, for example, whatever the provider is, there's a suite of product that's Android. And then maybe there's an iPhone, not in every market, maybe in Asia, but there's iPhones and there's Android. And it doesn't matter whether you buy a Samsung or whether you buy whatever. Google has, to their credit, built a phenomenal monopoly. But to their credit, they have basically commandeered Android, which was open source and still remains open source. But essentially, if you build anything of an operating system on Android and you don't have it Google certified, you'll get an error message on the UX that says this is not Google certified. And to the average person, when that comes up, what do they think? They think their phone's broken. So what do? They either turn it back in, which is what some of our customers did, or they go to Google Play and they download whatever they think they're going to download. The minute you download one app from Google Play, it doesn't have to be a Google app. The minute you go to Google Play, which is just a store, it's not anything else but a store. You have Aurora, you have several other stores that are open source that are not doing this, but Google Play is a store. It happens to be the biggest store on Android. The minute you download one app from Google Play, because every app in that store has to be Google services approved or certified, it rewrites all the ports on your hardware. Why does that matter? What does that mean? What it means is they take over your phone. Right. And in layman's terms. And that's if you had already de-Googled. So you could ruin it up with one click. Now, there's things out there at the highest scale called Pegasus that, is out of Israel, that countries will pay $1 million and they can send a text message. All they have to know is someone's phone number, because the phone number itself is not secure. Why? Because the phone provider that has that is in bed with the NSA, the Five Eyes, and everybody else, right? As of Edward Snowden days. And regardless of the legislation, it's baked in now to the thing. So everybody that has a phone number, no matter what else you do for your privacy, if you have a phone number, you're vulnerable to not only a hack, but attack and stalking, because there are technologies out there like Pegasus, and there'll be more, where for $1 million, I can send a 0-click text to you. I don't even have to, all I have to do is know your burner phone, your number. All I have to know is your number. And if I send a text to that phone, immediately takes over the microphone, the camera, the hard drives, everything. You don't have to click on it.
That's insane.
Right. And so these things are not new. These things have been out there for years. Now, what's my point? Again, not to fearmonger. I want to be very careful not to fearmonger. These things are things that are problematic. But here's the other reality. You and I alone can't do a damn thing about it, because in one way, but I do believe we can, as a collective, and start to move things in the right direction. Everything follows incentives. If you ever heard of the book Freakonomics years ago, right? The whole book was just about incentives, right? Incentives. Economies always follow incentives. So when you think about Web 1, Web 2, Web 3, what the hell does all that mean? Right? Web 1 was basically readable. It was the first version of the internet, and we tore down walled gardens. We basically said information should be liberated from the silos and the elite institutions that hoard it, because we have X amount of billion people on the planet at this time, and we think information is power, and it should be available to all. So the promise of the World Wide Web was to democratize access, and we did that for a while. The problem was what? There was no business model to it, so it didn't make money. But what else did it do? It disrupted and tore down every business model that was non-internet, that was analog, that did make money. Newspapers, music, right? Because now we were able to get those things for free.
Right.
And no one wanted to pay, no one wanted to do the paywall thing. So because we had this whole $800 billion a year spend in America or whatever on advertising, and in other countries, same thing, right? And all of a sudden those business models were no longer justifiable because people weren't subscribing as much. They were getting it for free. They were pirating it, whatever they were doing in the early days. When Web 2 emerged, right, technologies came out first, like hypertext protocol, that allowed for things to be clickable. So that enabled Amazon. You could have never had Amazon without HTTP. So Web 1 kind of grew up as this readable web, and then it became clickable, and that enabled search engines. But search engines were really terrible in the early days. They would either go to nothing because there was no content there. But then what happened was marketers figured out, wow, when I search this word, Google, or not Google, but AltaVista or Dogpile or Google in the early days, right, returns a thing that says 404 record, nothing found. Try and type a word in right now and find nothing. Can't do it. Why did that happen? Why did that happen? Because as we entered Web 2, we became into what's called the read-write web, read and write. Now it started with blogs. Now we created this possibility for read and write, back and forth, user-generated content, communities in the early days, Second Life and, Friendster, MySpace and blah, 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 right? This back and forth where the users were basically getting free utility, right? They weren't paying for it in their mind because it didn't cost them money. They in the beginning of email, we had to pay for email. Most people didn't get an email address until AOL and then Yahoo. And what Yahoo figured out, and then Gmail perfected, right, was wait, if I give them the email, I can read it and serve them ads. And most people just heard this for the first time, didn't realize Gmail was reading their email. That's the whole reason it exists.
Right.
Like you don't pay for it for that very reason. And if you ever look at the top of your inbox, there's still a text-driven ad, and most people look right past it, but it's there. If you've ever, and so as the read-write web took off, advertising started to become viable, and not only viable, it became exponentially better than the other analog world version of advertising. Now it wasn't about 40,000 cars driving by a billboard and maybe seeing it, maybe being in the demo. Now it was, holy crap, with Facebook, right? I could say, I want Korean women age 14 to 24 that have bought at least one thing from this makeup brand in the last 6 months, who watch the Kardashians, who shop at Nord, and like you could, and it gives you 1 million people, and then you pay 15 cents a click to get them in, and you're that targeted, right?
Right. Yeah.
So Web 2 became basically a platform game. And it was all built around data. The most genius move, I think, and I don't know if it's right or not, but for this example, when it comes to data, what was the most genius move Facebook made in the early, first 5-10 years? It was Facebook Connect. Why? What did Facebook Connect give them when it came to proxy over data?
Well, just to clarify, what exactly is Facebook Connect?
So when you go to a website, right? Like whatever store you want to shop at, whatever software you want to download, you see things now that say create a username, register,
log in with Facebook,
or it says log in with Facebook, Google, or Apple. Facebook Connect was the first one to do that. So Facebook Connect became log in with Facebook. Why did that matter? Because in their terms and conditions, up till that point, the only way they could scrape your data was based on what you did inside the walled garden of Facebook. You had to be in Facebook. And if you like stuff, they knew it. And if they recorded it all and they're reading it and they're making better, they're serving you different things. You're seeing things in your feed that I'm not seeing simply because of what you've liked or not liked or spent time on or watched 10 seconds of, or like it's heat mapped, it's everything, right? So the data that they were scraping for the first several years was limited to the walls of the site called Facebook. But you had credentials, and those credentials basically said, we own your data. In other words, inside Facebook, we own your identity. Now, no one's thought about Facebook as their identity before. No one's thought of Google as their identity or their search history as their identity. The reality is Google knows more about us than our spouses, our parents, our wives, our kids, our coworkers, because they know what we search for. They know our intent. They know when we do it. Netflix knows more about what we care about, what we like, what turns us on, what doesn't. Because what we watch, what we fast forward through, what we skip through, what we pause, what we rewind, what we watch twice. Starting to make sense? So our identity stopped being ours decades ago. Now, if you ask most people who owns your identity, their first reaction or knee jerk would be, well, I do. I'm me. Like no one can own me. I'm a free person. Okay. So when you buy a phone, what's the first thing the phone makes you do? Or a smart lamp, like you said, what's the first thing it makes you do? It makes
make an account.
Google. If you get an Android phone, you have to use a Gmail address.
Right.
And the only way around that, and we learned this by building a mobile operating system 2 years ago, was an anonymous Gmail address. It was the only way around it. Like, in other words, there is no other way around it.
Right. Yeah.
And if you get an Apple product, what's the first thing it does? It doesn't even apologize. It calls it your Apple ID.
Yeah. Your Apple identity. Right. Yeah.
Your Apple identity.
Yeah. Apple being the first word in Apple identity.
Exactly. And so you literally have to basically sign over your proxy to your digital life to this. Now, so what did Web 2 do? Well, it created massive amount of shareholder value.
Right.
It created unprecedented ability to target and advertise and serve, and it created careers for people, influencers, It broke new artists, Taylor Swift, Justin Bieber in the early days, still to this day, people doing it. It allowed people to build communities, but guess what they never did? They never owned any of it. And now we've started to see over the last couple of years that was true. Why? Because people were mad at Twitter or Facebook for not being free speech. But the reality is, although they have an ethical public right, and because they can swing elections, they now have a mandate to basically not censor or at least be punished if they do. The reality is the very nature of a walled garden is no different than a private space. Like if I have a yoga studio in the Philippines or whatever, and I don't want certain people in there, or I want men to wear shirts, and someone comes in without a shirt, I have every right to kick him out of my store because he's in a private space. Now, if he does yoga across the street from my store with his shirt off and draws attention, he's in a public space. I have no right to tell him no. But the web was public, and then it became private. And Web 2, it was read write, and then it became platformed. And when we went to platforms and we all started to sign in for free, we gave our identities and our proxy and our rights over to the platform. And as that happened, they got bigger and bigger and bigger. And as they got to billions, they got network effects that are impossible to dismantle. So what's my point? My point is Web 3 is about owning and executing at the same time, right? Web 3 is about ownership at the edge again. It's about fulfilling the promise of Web 1, but we're not going to get there in one leap, because for identity to be solved, it's not even something a government can solve, right? Because governments are they're in bed with they're relying on the technology companies too, right? So this corporate world that we live in now that's driving the governmental decisions is a whole different mess. I call it the advertising industrial complex. We're all aware of the military industrial complex. Well, now we have the advertising industrial complex. It's just as evil and bad, right? And so what's the answer? Well, the answer is going to be incentives have to shift again. The minute that someone, whether it's Elon, whether it's someone else, who knows what it's going to be, someone with a platform from Web 2, Jack might do it, who knows, right? Can find a way through common interest communities, through tokenization, through shared economies that are real shared economies, not the Ubers and the Googles. Because again, Uber and Airbnb and all these things, they're just platform companies. You don't own that. They know when you get out of your car. They know how many times you go to the airport. They know all of it. You don't own any of it. You can't turn it off. You can't say, hey, by the way, I don't want you to have that data on me anymore. Good luck. You signed it off the minute you jumped in that Uber. They have no obligation to do that, legally or otherwise. So what's going to have to happen is we're going to need digital identity. I've seen thousands of startups, Civic, there's all these amazing open source technologies. They're never going to scale though, because billions of people are just going in, droning out, getting a phone. And they're not thinking about this, especially if it's their first one. So it's going to have to be some kind of coming together of, we have AI now that's powerful enough to fake us all out. Deep fakes on steroids are coming, and the election season's coming up, and here and in other places, I think there'll be a tragedy. I don't say that with any hope. I say that with probability is that there'll be some kind of attack that happens, whether it swings an election or not, and it will be indiscernible until someone figures out later that it happened. And it could be served by a rogue nation that doesn't like us or doesn't like, the West or whatever, but it'll be the president or someone like that running for president doing something that gets them in hot water or gets them not voted for or what have you, and it will be completely fake and we won't know. And so what happens if you don't have control of your proxy over your data? Well, it's not about whether you're doing anything bad or not. That's the stupid excuse, right? Like, oh, I'm not doing anything anybody cares about anyway. That's not the point. The point is the only thing that we all have that's equal is the fact that every second of every day, we are throwing off data exhaust. In 2018 is the last time I have a stat for this. I got to find a new one somewhere. In 2018, the amount of data exhaust globally was 400 zettabytes. Now, I had to look up what a zettabyte was.
Yeah, please run that by me.
Okay, here's how it breaks down. You know what a gigabyte is?
Of course.
Because that's basically everybody runs out of space on their 2 gigabytes in a hurry because they got photos and pictures, right? So we quantify that. Mm-hmm. So in 2018, we were throwing off 10 gigabytes of data exhaust, meaning data that was not mined, harvested, refined, or analyzed for insights.
Mm-hmm.
That
Just
was the
raw
waste.
data.
10 gigabytes of data exhaust every 10 minutes in a 24-hour day for all 7.8 billion people on the planet. And that was 5 years ago.
Wow.
What does that mean? We've gotten better at harvesting it. What does AI do? AI can read it in nanoseconds, harvest it, insight it, and turn it into something. So if we don't have big platform companies, or one, take the lead and show a way to profitability, or some combination of people and profit that is the new model, the new incentive structure, the new norm, right? Then we're all doomed. Because if we keep putting exponential productive technology, so think about it this way, productivity layer is things like 3D printing, robotics, AI. These are productive. These things make stuff, right?
Right.
Above that is the distribution layer. These are tokens, NFTs, fungibles, right? Because that's how you move stuff.
The containers, right?
Yeah, the containers. So if you think about technology, just without knowing anything about technology, we all understand making stuff, moving stuff, buying stuff.
Right.
So we make stuff with exponential technologies like generative AI and large language models and blah, 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 blah. And we can make it faster, better, cheaper, and more than we ever could. Thousands of people for the cost of $50 a month, right? Like literally we've done that with productivity. So now we can make stuff faster than ever, and we can make content, we can make noise, we can make media, we can make all these things that we watch, consume, and do. We can move it now faster. If we move it through Web2 rails, we're moving it through 5 platforms, 4 or 5 platforms that control the entire planet. They don't even have to be evil. That's so centralized that when we start putting that exponential output through 5 funnels that own all that data, it's totalitarian from day one. It doesn't have to be, no one has to be bad. The power is too great. So the only way around that is to start to fragment and decentralize that distribution layer. Right? The writers in Hollywood and the actors are on strike right now in America. Many of you've probably heard it over there, right? So all these shows are on hold right now. Directors are, like it's a big thing. They don't even know what they're negotiating for. They know that they need to negotiate. They know that they don't have a lot of leverage. They know that they're scared. Those things are all true, but they don't really understand the technology enough to understand what they're negotiating for. Here's what they're negotiating for. What they're negotiating for is that all this productivity tech that's been built, all these generative AIs, was built consuming all the content that existed. But that content was made by humans. But those rights were sold years ago when they did the last deal. Right. So now the rights are owned by the studios or whomever. So what they're negotiating for is not what was old. They might be able to get some clawback.
Yeah.
It'd be ethical and right to give them some clawback. But whether they do or not, now what they're trying to figure out is, holy crap, whatever I do next is one and done. Because now with 11 Labs, with Replica, with all these different technologies, and I could name thousands of them, right? You've seen the charts already of all the things. I could basically, you could create me at scale. So how do you know it was Chris versus somebody botting me? Right?
So, Chris, I just wanted to jump in here because you're completely correct in pointing out we are at this interesting crossroads in technology. On the one hand, like you said, generative AI is under fire for its potential to infringe, right, on the rights that artists and creators have over their work. But on the other hand, as you pointed out, advances in NFTs and smart contracts are empowering these same creatives with new ways to monetize their work in the long run, potentially. So from your perspective, I'm just going to throw this out there. How should we be steering this ship so we land closer to utopia rather than to dystopia?
I don't have the answer to that. I'm listening to a fascinating book right now on Audible called Life 3.0. And I recommend it. It's very thought-provoking. There's 7 or 8 different paths there, and that could be a 3-hour discussion all on its own. What I'll say to try and answer the question and not dodge it, because I don't want to pretend I have the answer. What I do know is that these kind of things, we have to join the conversation. That's the simplest thing. That's the most powerful and simplest thing. We have to educate ourselves. Not because we care about technology. I could give a crap about technology. Like most people who crack up, they're like, "You're in technology." I mean, yeah, but I'm not in technology because I love technology. Like I don't care, right? I mean, I don't. I wasn't into technology as a kid. I had balls for toys. I didn't, I didn't even have video games like when I was a kid. So my point is that like, whatever it is that you do care about, there's something for you here, because your life is technology. There's not a company out there that exists today. It's not a technology company. I read something years ago that said that the average company, regardless of like Fortune 100, 500, whatever, has 50 to 100 technology integrations just in their workflows and in their operating procedures. And that was in 2017 when we published Digital Sense. So by the very nature of just how they do work, software, right, had eaten the world, as Mark Andreessen predicted 20 some odd years ago. They're a technology company because if they're relying on a business process, even if humans are doing it, technology's involved. Someone's got to know where to log in. Someone's got to know, what the, like, so we don't have a choice. We're in technologies in every aspect of our lives. The average screen time, I think in the Philippines, like 7.5 hours a day. Like, that's technology. So find a reason to be curious that stimulates you is my number one advice. Number two, get in where you fit in. And what I mean by that is if, you're an activist, then be an activist. If you're a creator, then start to be thoughtful about what is it that humans, because assume that the machine is going to be able to create faster, better, cheaper than you would. Okay, so as a human, will that totally replace me? Or what will that replace? Well, it might replace colleges. It might replace professorships that stand in front of a class. It won't necessarily, it might replace research assistants, but it's not going to replace someone connecting the dots. It's not going to replace a massage therapist right away. It's not going to replace, like there's a lot of things, there's jobs, there's career paths, there's things that won't be replaced, at least not for the next 50 to 100 years, or maybe ever, right? And so if you're shaping your career, if you're at the early days of your career, you're mid-career, but you're in a dead end because this is going to come eat your lunch or you just got laid off, then you don't want to go right into something that's going to get laid off three years from now, right? 2 years from now, because you'll be doing it all over again. So this is the time to think and pause and recalibrate. Right now, all you have to do to be an expert in AI is know something that's not being barfed out on the news and be 15 weeks ahead of any one of your peer set, right? And you'll get a promotion simply because you're the only one in the company that knows anything about it, right? So there's short-term opportunities, and then there's like the responsible one of, well, if I'm going to do that, then I might as well go all in, right? Like I'm a guy who's either on or off. I don't have a middle gear. So it's like, I'm not going to do something to just get by. If I'm going to do it, I'm doing it. If I'm not doing it, I'm not doing it. I don't know how to be any other way, so I don't encourage people to be another way. I do think that, you find something and you start to think about this. And if you have cash flow right now, and if you have a career right now, don't take it for granted, but plan for when a rainy day might come, or plan for when a bright day of opportunity might come, because you have knowledge and experience that is unique to your life experience. And all of a sudden there's going to be a tool and there's going to be an audience that needs that. And you're not going to be able to educate people, or you're going to be able to help people that don't have what you have. And that becomes an opportunity for you. So, I mean, and when it comes to data, be thoughtful, right? Like you made a perfect example of it. It's not about stopping consumption. It's about stopping blind choices that compound the problem, not because you don't care about whether you're being spied on or not, but because we're all creeped out by it, right? Like every parent that learned that, wait a minute, maybe my kid's faces on social media wasn't such a good idea, because now AI can scrape that and they can turn it into all kinds of things, and pedophiles and all kinds of bad people can see, right? Like, holy shit, I just put all my kids' pictures on the internet, and and it's like, they just didn't think. Now, I'm not saying don't share things. I'm not saying everybody should do what they want to do, but be thoughtful about it. Does public really need to be public? Like Venmo, for example. I crack up. And Venmo has public, and people in America, I don't know if they do it over there, people say, here's $10, Tiago, here's $10. And it's like, that's for the weed, or that's for the drink. So and I'm like, dude, you realize like these guys report to the authorities, to the IRS, to God knows who. And you're literally on here just showing every dollar you spend and on what. And it's like, what the hell are you thinking? Like, so I know whenever I've never used Venmo without putting private on the transaction, because I don't I don't want anybody to know what I'm buying or who I'm buying it from. And I tell people, if you're sending me Venmo, do not make it public, or I don't want your money. So it's little things like that. You have to change behavior. I mean, stop buying a smart lamp. Do you really need a smart lamp, or any lamp will do? Now, unfortunately, what happens is you go to a store and the only kind of lamps you can buy are smart. The only kind of cars you can buy are smart. I went into the BMW dealership when I bought my last car and I told them, turn it all off. I love the car, but all this shit, because it started driving me, but not driving me. Like, I'm like, look, I either want it to drive me 100%, where I'm in the back seat, send an email, and it's doing its thing safely, or I want to drive it. I do not want to be shifting lanes or drifting and have it jerk the wheel back because it thinks I'm leaving the lane, because then I will shift this way and crash into someone.
Absolutely.
So, you know, again, some of these things, it's like you don't have the choice if you consume new stuff. But, you know, my wife and I were talking the other day. It was like, oh, I'm going to get a Roomba. I said, no, you're not. I said, honey, I will vacuum. We're not getting a Roomba. Like, you really want a vacuum that inch by inch is creating a digital blueprint twin of your freaking house?
Yeah.
You want a pet that's a robot with eyes and cameras in it that's walking around your house? Are you an idiot?
Yeah. Right.
And you don't own the data. Now, if you own the NFT that was the storage of that Ring doorbell or of that pet, and only you had access to that proxy, and only you could share that film or that footage, that's different. But if I got to trust some tech company with it that I don't know, no, not doing it. So I'm not for, you know, stopping this. It's not like I'm like, oh, go cold turkey. I'm not anti-technology by any means. I'm in technology. I invest in it. I'm just saying, as a consumer, be thoughtful.
I think that's fantastic advice. Earlier, you've been framing this as weapon or tool, right? And it lands somewhere in the middle, right? With Philippine Blockchain Week coming up in a few weeks, stakeholders from the private sector, the government, the academia, they're all coming together. You know, individuals like yourself coming in in a bid to position the Philippines potentially as the blockchain capital of Asia. At least that's what Donald's been saying. And a lot of these efforts are being directed towards supporting our nation's, call it 6.8 million or so creatives, right? These are illustrators, video game developers, musicians, and performers. Now, speaking to these technologies as a tool, maybe optimistically or pragmatically, if you want to stick there, what exciting applications of blockchain tech do you see shaping the future of these creative industries?
Well, if you think about blockchain technology and AI, they're marriage made in heaven, and they're also basically, AI will be the force function that makes blockchain a buzzword in the media again, right? Because of what we talked about earlier. If I can create an exponential amount of content creative without a human, or with a human in the loop, but basically like the job of 1,000 humans prior, now I can have one person or two people in a studio put out the same output as 1,000, right? What I've done is I've now created an opportunity for people who can't hire 1,000, but at the same time, I've also created a noise level that's coming that will mean that it becomes more expensive to stand out, right? We saw this with YouTube in the early days of social media. In the beginning, if you had 70,000 followers, right, like you were talking to a football stadium or what have you, and you could be a nobody, but you had influence. But if you got in now and you got the 70,000 Twitter followers, you're nobody. Right? Like, it's too expensive to matter. No one's seeing your stuff. No one cares. Like, so unless you're really, really good, right? So the cream always rises to the top. And ultimately, I believe, I could be wrong, I believe human beings ultimately want to consume what other human beings are doing. I think we can be inspired by technology. I think we can be inspired by innovation. But ultimately, what we're really inspired by, this is my belief, again, I could be wrong, is what humans do with it. Here's a totally different example, has nothing to do with like screens. Skiing. I've always been a skier. I love downhill skiing, right? When I was coming up, if you watched the skiers in the Olympics back then, right, they were all going forward. They were on moguls, and if they did a helicopter, which was a 360, it was like the trick of the day, right? Now, think about 20 some odd years later, you wouldn't even make it to the Olympic training team if that's all you could do, right? Well, what enabled that? Ski technology, right? We created parabolic skis, we created the back thing. So now skiing backwards at full speed and doing all these other things enabled a smoother glide. It was less taxing on the muscles, and we created ramps, and so human beings created these jumps that are 360s and 1500s and backwards over a canyon, and humans did that, right? Skis didn't do that. Humans did that. But without those skis, a human wouldn't be able to do that. And I believe, I also hope, but I do believe that that's what we're going to do to some degree with generative AI with these things. I think we're going to see creative tools that come out, and in the beginning, they look like they're going to replace human beings, because they will. But what they'll also do is they will make incompetence quality. Because now someone with no talent will be able to put out something that you used to have a lot of talent to do. But what if you're talented? Right? Like, I'm a good skier. You will never see me for a number of reasons. But even if I was in my prime, you would never see me be able to do what a Shaun White on a snowboard or what some of these skiers can do. It's not in my DNA, but I'm a good skier. So you'll have a bunch of people that are good creatives. And they'll be able to create things they would have never been able to create before. They'll be able to maybe earn incomes that allow them to live and do their passion. They won't get rich, but they might be able to do what they love versus doing something they hate, right? And AI will enable that. But the bar of excellence will just become this much higher. And there will still be people that hit it. And they will get all the rewards. And they will make billions, not millions, simply because of the laws of network effects and inflation and everything else. And so I do believe that's our future. And in that case, that's where PBW, Philippines, Southeast Asia as a hub, and also given the fact that there's a hunger there. And I say that with the utmost love and respect, because it's what I resonate with. I am not a guy that likes to be around people that don't have that. I don't know how else to say it. There's people who, have a lot of money, they have whatever. And in my mind, they're spoiled or they're miserable because there's something about the come up. There's something about hunger I've just always resonated with. And I see that in these emerging markets because there's just this embracing of it amongst not only the policymakers, but also the youth and the parents and everybody, because they want opportunity, right? And if this could get me there, if the mobile phone could get me there, if social media could get me there, I'm going to do it, right? And I think that is an asset, far bigger of an asset. And it's what built my country. It's what built America, right? We were hungry when we came here, right? From all over. And we still have it. I'm not saying we don't have it, but we certainly are not as hungry as we were. And not at scale. And I think that it's very possible that multiple countries like Philippines and its major, metropolitan areas and like Indonesia will find ways to collaborate and leverage their strengths and create a region. And with their consumer base being young and digitally native, put a whole economy in the next 20 years that rivals what we see today. I mean, look what China did with the kind of manufacturing economy of the last 30 years. They built their entire thing in the last 40 years, right? This will be that on steroids for somebody else. And, you see Dubai, you see parts of Europe doing it, but there's, I think it's absolutely up for grabs. And you have the youth on your side, you have the buy-in. And so, this platform and what Donald and Cheska and the team and everybody, what you guys are supporting at the Star, I mean, from an outside looking in, I have no vested interest in this other than I want to be part of it in some contributing way. You have no idea how positioned you guys are right now to do something that 10 years from now shocks the world. I mean, you have already the BPO game locked. You already have the respect of that. You have 95% people speaking English. You have the most pleasant, kind, and considerate, like people that are trained in customer experience, trained in customer service. Well, who do you think is going to be the customer? Well, here's the customer. The customers are going to be AIs buying from other AIs using tokens. That's going to be a customer, and they're going to deal with themselves. But there's still going to be humans buying stuff, even if we're all dogs in the park or squirrels in the park, right? We're still going to need bones. We're still going to need balls to play with. And when we need help, we're going to speak dog to another dog, right? We're not going to speak robot, most of us. So, I mean, no matter how far out you want to extrapolate, like humanity, unless it kills itself because we don't replace these Web2 rails with something better and democratize the access to data and share that economy, that CPM doesn't go away. It doesn't have to. The advertising dollar doesn't have to stop spending. It just can't be hoarded by the media network and the platform anymore. Not when you and I are the ones generating the content, not when you and I are the ones creating the asset. We have to stand up and say, I'm not going to do business with you anymore. I'll delete my account. I don't care what it costs me. I shouldn't have put all my memories in there in the first place. Whatever that is, there will be some point where we either replace it with something better and it just kind of falls out of relevance, or where we stand up and revolt. I hope.
Chris, I want to make sure that before we wrap, that there's enough time for us to talk about another initiative, speaking to your role as supporting this growing ecosystem, Web3 ecosystem in the region. Last time you were in Manila, during Philippine Blockchain Week, I understand you found yourself kind of coincidentally spending time with E-Entertainment co-founder Larry Namer. And in that time, if I understand the story correctly, you're able to onboard him to launch an exciting new initiative celebrating creative ventures in Web3.
Yeah, and I think this is a short story because I know we're wrapping up here, but this is a great one. This is like one of those ones that humans will love, and as an entrepreneur, I'll just always think of. So Larry and I were both keynoting. We didn't know each other, never met before, and we're supposed to be on the same flight. I didn't know that. But I land in Manila and it's like late, 11 o'clock, whatever time it is. I get to the end of the jetway and there's a placard because the PBW team takes care of, their speakers and their people like nobody else. There's a placard. Of course, it's got my name on it. And below my name says Larry Namer. I'm like, oh, I'm riding in the car with someone to wherever the event is. So waiting now, he's the founder. So I'm Googling like who he is. Because I'm like, well, I wonder who he is. Sit next to him for a little bit. Might as well figure out who he is while I'm waiting. So I see he's like founder of E-Entertainment. I'm like, huh, okay, well. So 5-10 minutes goes by, and I'm like, there's no way this guy wasn't in first class. Like, I'm like, I don't think he's on the plane. And the driver is super. He's like, oh no, Mr. Snook, I promise I will get to you soon. I said, listen, I'm not worried about it. Like, if I was late, I would hope that you would stay for me. So please, I'm not pressuring you. I'm just telling you. I don't think he's on the plane. And so now all of a sudden, now the staff is coming out and the people in row 98 are coming out and there's now the flight attendants are coming out. Like there's nobody left on that plane. And he's like, well, he says it wanted to manifest. So anyway, I go to the event. So I do my keynote next day, go through the whole thing. And I keep seeing in the feed of the WhatsApp, hey, Larry Namer's event's being moved to tomorrow night or whatever. Yeah. They were doing this thing for him. So I'm just kind of following it along. So anyway, find out, oh, there was this issue, the plane, he didn't get, he was told he wasn't on that flight. He came back the next day. He was told he should have left that day. So it was this whole mess. And so I'm thinking, oh my God, I can't believe, I don't know if I would come. I mean, this is a long flight and he's going to basically land, do his thing, and then take off again. And he's, got to be, I mean, he's launched a Kardashians. I love that I'm here, but I don't know if I would make it. If it was me. So if he comes, I'm like, why is he here? So anyway, I'm skeptical in the back of my mind. I'm like, why is this dude even coming if he's this big of a deal and this is the brain damage he had to get here? So he gets there, and of course he's, he has to get right on stage and whatever, not soon. So I see him in the green room, and I just went up to him and said hi to him. I said, look, I was the guy who was supposed to be in the car with you, but glad you finally made it here. Look forward to your talk. And I just walked away. Sat down, he goes up on stage, does this fireside chat. Kills it, right? Super humble, just amazing. Just absolutely crushes it. And I've seen a lot of people do firesides and interviews, and I just immediately like the guy, immediately like him. So anyway, that's it. So then later that night, there's the party. So I'm sitting on the couch because I was tired or sore or something. So I'm sitting down on the couch. And he comes in and he sits down on the couch and he's sitting across from me. So we're having this conversation. There's like 3 or 4 of us around there. And all we're talking about is like Web3 and entertainment and media and stuff. And he makes this comment. We're talking about FTX at the time because it wasn't that, it just happened like a couple months before. And so he makes this comment about, somebody should do a show on all the good things in this space. He's saying it from like a producer and a Hollywood standpoint. He's like, because there's a lot of great things happening in this space. So we're all like nodding. I'm like, yeah, I agree. And he's like, somebody's going to do it at some point, whatever it'll be. So I went to bed. So then I woke up in the middle of the night and I'm like, I can't believe you fumbled that one. Like you are an idiot. Like, how did you fumble that one? Like he walked right in. And what I was talking about was in my mind, like 12 months earlier or something, I had come up with this concept, the NFTs, NFTYS. And it was the idea of like the Grammys or the Oscars of Web3 innovation and culture, this new art form, because there isn't anything like that. There's award shows and there's crypto conferences, but there's nothing like quality and at that level that's super interactive. And it's like the award show of the future for this emerging art and creative culture of the future that's global. And so I was like, but I know how to do crypto conferences. I know how to organize startup events. I know how to do that. I know what good TV looks like, but I'm not the guy to create it. And I'll never get the people that I need onboarded with my resume. I'll need someone who really gets it. So I just put it on the shelf. Like I trademarked it. I was like, cool. Another one of my 1,000 ideas that I wake up with every day. And I'll just like leave that over there. So I woke up in the middle of the night in my hotel because I was flying out the next morning. And I was like, I can't believe you didn't bring it up to him. Like he basically was saying, I think somebody should do something good in this space. He wasn't talking about like an award show, but it's kind of similar. So I made a promise to myself. It's like, well, I'm not going to bother. I'm not going to be that guy. But if fate's supposed to have us intertwine or conversate around this, then I'm not going to waste it. I'm going to bring it up. So I get up 7:30 in the morning, go grab coffee before my 8 o'clock shuttle to the airport to go home. I get in the lobby at the Marriott and I hear a guy, hey man. And I look over and it's Larry. And, I don't know why he said, hey man, other than maybe he liked me from the night before. We didn't talk about this at all. So he waves me up. So I kind of have my coffee. And so the first thing I did is say, how was your night? He's like, good. He's like, did you get any sleep at all? I was like, yeah. I said, well, you're heading home already. He's like, yeah. And I said, well, look, I said, yesterday you made a comment. And I said, I really have no attachment to this. If you say no, or if you're not interested, it's not going to hurt my feelings. But I have to say this because I fumbled it last night like an idiot. And I tell him, like, I got this thing. It's an award show. It'll be this. And that was about how fast I said it. And he goes, okay, well, that's interesting, actually. But do me a favor. Email me that we talked about this. Let me think about it a little bit. Let me talk to some of my people. And if there's any interest, I'll get back to you. I said, sure. So I literally, while we were sitting there, said, Nifty's reminder, we had a discussion. Let me know if you're interested in talking about it further. Send it. That was all it said. So go to the airport. I go into the lounge. I'm answering an email. He decided, I guess, to go to the gate. We got a 2-hour wait. The lounge gets crowded. So about an hour before the flight, I go over to the gate. It's packed. Right. Manila Airport. So it's packed. There's nowhere to sit. And I got my roller bag and I'm like, oh man, there's nowhere to sit. I'm like, okay, well, I only got to wait 45 minutes. And all of a sudden I look over and I see an empty seat. And I'm not like racing over to it, but I start walking towards it. I'm like, well, hopefully no one else will see it before I do. So I see an empty seat. And as I walk over to it, I look and this guy is like, lifts up his head and it's Larry. Right. So I literally sit next to Larry for an hour and change. And we talk about growing up in Brooklyn and Trenton and common things. And we spent about an hour getting to know each other and then flew home. He sat behind me. So when we were leaving, we exited off different doors in LA and I just waved to him and said, like saluted him. Didn't say anything else. 3 days later, he sends me an email. It's like 14 paragraphs long. And he's like, I'm interested. If you want to partner on it, here's my terms. And let me know if you want to have a discussion. And 12 days later, we had legal done and we partnered on it. And so he and I have we've formed 2 things. He's joined the Nifty's as an equity partner and as in the production company and a co-executive producer. And that all happened because I attended Philippine Blockchain Week. And I say that because I think the thing to not get impressed by is what happened. I've been doing business a long time. He's obviously been doing business a long time. When you meet somebody, you have a good idea and it resonates with, then, things like that can happen. But the fact that in year 1, something this substantial was just one of many serendipity moments that happen. I'm not sure what other people's serendipity moments are. I know I had that. I also partnered with Donald Lim on a show that we do with the New York Stock Exchange called Web3 Show, because Donald and I got to know each other. I reached out to him afterwards. He said yes. So I came out of a week in Philippines, not only with a great experience and meeting a lot of great people, but with two different relationships that are now in commercial activities in my portfolio that are amazing. And they were super serendipitous and very organic. And I think that's the important thing as a platform that PBW is. And that's why we're excited to kind of have the NFTs be officially opening up a wild card nomination, which is live now on our site. If you go to nifties.org, you'll see in the top that it says, if you have a ticket at any value level to PBW, which I think you can get for like 50% off right now, then that's your proof, so that we don't get a lot of bots and spam, right? That's your proof. You just have to, show us your confirmation number, your ticket number in the final field. You can nominate a Web3 or related project or startup from anywhere in Southeast Asia, Philippines, Indonesia, wherever they may be, in a period that closed in May, but we've opened it up specifically just for Southeast Asia because we're looking to make sure we have several companies that are going to be announced on September 20th that have already been vetted and through the process with our academy and been voted to be finalists. They'll be announced on the 21st live from the stage in Philippines. But we also wanted to basically August, between now and the end of this month, have people that we may have missed have the chance to submit against one of the 17 categories, a project that should be considered. And we'll pick, if we get, a couple hundred or 1,000, then we'll probably pick a wild card maybe for 9 or 10 categories. If we get 100 or 50, that's 50 we didn't see before. And if there's enough that are qualified, maybe we pick 1 or 2 wild cards. But the point is, we have a very special relationship that we want to cultivate, not only with Southeast Asia market at large, but through the Philippines and through PBW specifically, because the NFTs kind of came to be there, and also because of the talent base there. And so we're super excited about that. And as years go on, I think we'll figure out ways to turn that into a bigger node and into an on-ramp for for Academy members to join and influence the vote and influence nominees and things from the region more effectively. But Larry and I formed the Academy of Digital Art Sciences and Culture, which is going to be a DAO, but it isn't right now. But it's got 36 founding members, of which Janelle and Barreto is one, and Donald is another, and representing that region. And so they will be the ones who actually vote on the winners that get part of the live broadcast in January. However, right now, anybody can nominate someone. And the only caveat is we want them, because we want people to attend the event, and we ultimately want the nominee potential wildcards to attend the event. And you can get tickets for as low as whatever it is, like $25 or something US. So we want people to nominate people if they're actually coming and if they're part of a community, because we want to support PBW and give them one more reason to make sure they check it out for themselves.
So Chris, I know that we actually went an hour over the time we agreed to, so I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
That's my fault, not yours.
No, but I just wanted to ask maybe, how exactly are you envisioning the Nifty Awards to be different from traditional award shows? Maybe
so a couple of things, and it'll expand each year, right? But a couple of things that we're going to do is we have a state-of-the-art physical broadcast studio that we can have over 577,000 live people with a front row seat interacting at a variety of different levels simultaneously with the in-person audience, which will be limited to about 180, and that'll include the nominees that are on site and VIPs and things like that. And every seat is tokenized, so every ticket that gets bought to watch the live stream, which tickets are to watch the live on-demand version in January, are as cheap as I think $5.99 US or something like that. But they will come with a bunch of things: a commemorative NFT version minted on the XRPL ledger through that partnership, and then that'll unlock different bonuses. They'll get a free annual membership that's about $99 a year to the Academy, which will give them some influence, some say, some bonuses, and just some education around the space. And they don't have to pay anything for that. They'll just get that if they're part of that live broadcast, right? And they'll literally be part of the show. They'll be part of the broadcast, just like the people in the audience or on the stage would be. And that'll broadcast globally, anywhere with an internet connection on any device, no goggles, no nothing needed. And there's a dashboard that's in there, and there'll be live throughout the show. There'll be different things. Some of the things we have planned are, we have like a famous designer, Richie Rich, who's designed for Lady Gaga and Madonna and several others over his career, who's designing a couple of dresses for some of our presenters, like Sophia the Robot. And during the show, there'll be a Dutch auction of not only the physical dress, but also some of the assets and the drawings and like similar NFTs. And so to be part of those collections, you'll be part of that live audience. Now, the show will replay right now. We have syndication deals on cable and OTT and some other new media platforms that'll reach about 193 million homes. Working on one right now that'll go across mainland China. That'll add another billion homes. And so we think we'll pick up over the 90 days after the live broadcast, somewhere around 10 million unique viewers that will still be able to participate on the secondary market or whatever. But if you're part of the live show, then you're not only part of the show, you're watching it live, you're interacting with people through this amazing dashboard and watching it as if you were there. There's DJ Paul Oakenfold's going to do some sets in between. We've got it's just a crazy awesome lineup. It'll run about 90 minutes to just under 2 hours, so it'll be a short broadcast because we want it to be Hollywood quality but not Hollywood boring. There'll be a red carpet, which no one's better at red carpets than Larry. He did 30 years of them with if not 36. But we'll jazz that up, and then it'll be a global audience, and everything will be any languages that we have that are identifiable. We regionally translated using AI and using some other technology through in real time. So like people don't have to have anything special.
Wow.
Like they'll see the host, but it'll be translated in their language. So what we're doing is we're leveraging the benefits of these technologies and the best in Hollywood creative to put on a show that's entertaining and for the Gen XYZ generation, and that celebrates excellence in the space. So it will become, and our vision for it is that it becomes what the Oscars was in the early 1920s when film became a new medium and it established itself, or what the Grammys did for music. It'll become that for this next wave of cultural expression. And more importantly than that, it won't be US centric. It's global from day one. It happens to be broadcast live from Vegas, but that's only because that's where the most state-of-the-art studio is that we can find right now that's convenient to do. As soon as somebody else has one, the Nico Theater layer and the metaverse layer that we're broadcasting it through can move to any infrastructure anywhere in the world. So the idea is that we find, discover, and highlight the best regardless of where they're from. We don't have an Asian Web3 category because we don't think there should be the denomination around that as if the West is the hub. So we basically have categories that are like best of this, and it's from everywhere. Someone in Indonesia has just as much of a chance as someone in Silicon Valley.
That's incredible. And a real showcase of these new technologies in order to better showcase the innovators of these technologies. I think it's amazing.
Yeah, and the purpose of it is because culture has always come first. Technology may have been invented, but humanity has always moved through culture, not the other way around. And if our culture is we want to be drones to the warbot overlords, well then, okay, that's a choice. But I think that humans have shown over time that they always, even at the risk of a dark ages, they always have valued expression and humanity and their humanity over some other alternative, even at great sacrifice. I hope we don't have to see the great sacrifice part. What I do know is that if we don't celebrate the nuances and the differences of these cultures, if we don't create a platform where that expression is inspirational and aspirational and attractive to those doing it, then AI will homogenize us all into a monoculture simply because of the algorithmic way it behaves. And at that point, we would lose some of our best history of the last 10, 20,000 years. And so, this is a positive way to, again, do something fun that's interesting to me and meet artists and creatives. And technologists, and at the same time to preserve our most human expression.
Amazing. Well, I'm sure we're going to hear more about it at Philippine Blockchain Week a month from now. So thank you so much for your time today. Looking forward to seeing you in Manila.
Yeah, get your tickets, everybody. And thanks so much. I appreciate all the time and certainly all the research you did. It was impressive. And can't wait to share and wherever this goes, or article or whatever it is, please send it to me and I'll see you guys in Philippines.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chris.